Okay. Good morning, Rabbi Isai. Let me just bring up the text on the screen. There we go. A happy Lag BaOmer, everyone. Hope everyone's doing well. Okay. All right. We're going to take a look at two pieces in the Biurim today on page Dalet of the Imrei Yaakov. And we're talking about the importance for a person who wishes to be pious. Now, everything that we're speaking about is what's called midas chasidus, which means that it's not halachically imperative, but a person who wishes to live by a higher standard of living should always fulfill not only his word, but also machshavos libo, but the thoughts of his heart, or what he thinks in his mind, that if he commits himself to do something for someone else, and he commits himself either financially or otherwise, he should always try to follow through on his commitments, even if the commitments were made only to himself. Now, of course, we need to qualify this very carefully. The Rav Shulchan Aruch had said that this is only true if it's to someone else, that it's because it involves a ben adam lechavero kind of aspect, meaning that it's not only a matter of being truthful to oneself, but I had committed mentally to do something for another person, so therefore I should follow through. And it sounds like the basis for it is because if I committed something to my fellow Jew, I have to follow through and do that. And that's why he said explicitly that if you only committed something to do for yourself, so then you're off the hook unless there's a mitzvah involved. Because then it becomes not only a matter of ben adam lachavero, even though there is no ben adam lachavero, but there's an aspect of mitzvah nonetheless. And when you commit to do a mitzvah, even mentally, you should do your best always to follow through on that commitment. So where do we learn this concept that a person should try to be truthful to his commitments, even when they're only made mentally? So he says, so he brings the source in the Biurim over here. The example that is cited, that if you had committed to pay a certain amount or charge a certain amount for an item, let's say I'm the seller, and the seller had thought to himself, I'm going to sell this item for $100, and the guy comes and offers me 120. Since I already committed to sell it for 100, I should stick with that original, and I should tell the guy, listen, I was only interested in taking 100 for it, so 100 is fine. Now, again, it's very uncharacteristic of what we would normally expect in today's world. But the applications are limited because in most situations, you advertise a particular price in advance. But there could be situations, even in the real world, where the price is not advertised, and the guy has to make an offer to you. Okay, can anyone think of some real life examples of that?
If you, I mean, it's a story about the person who was saying the Shema. I can't remember who it was. And
yeah, well, Paul, that's what we're going to see now.
Okay.
We're going to get into the Gemara now.
Right.
But I'm just asking for people
real life
to give us real life scenarios. Anyway, Makor Hadavar hu b'Makos Chaf Daled Amud Aleph. So the source of this is in the Gemara in Makos. The Isa Sham v'Dover Emes Bilvavo, that the Gemara comments on the pasuk in Tehillim that says that a righteous person speaks truth in his heart. Kigon Rav Safra. The example of this is Rav Safra. Upirish Rashi b'Shem HaSheiltos Dahachi Hava Uvda. Now, even though the Gemara doesn't provide us the whole story, Rashi quotes from a Gaonic source called the Sheiltot that tells us the story. The Rav Safra hayalo chayfetz echad linkor. Rav Safra had a certain piece of merchandise that was available for sale. Uba Adam Echad Lefanav Bisha Sheyakori Kriya Shema. And as Paul remembers the story, that a person came to him while he was in the middle of reciting Kriya Shema, Va'amar Lo Tein Li Hachefetz Bekach Bekach Damim. And he says to Rav Safra, as Rav Safra is davening, he says to him, I'll pay you I'll pay you X for this amount. He says, I'll give you 100 for this object. V'lo anahu Rav Safra mipnei shahaya kriya shema. And Rav Safra didn't respond, not because he deliberately meant to ignore the guy, but rather because he was in the middle of kriya shema. And the fellow thought that this was a mercantile ploy, that what the guy was trying to do was to feign insult, so that the guy would you're not even worth my attention because you offered such a low price. So v'hosef v'omar tanehu li b'kach yoser, and so the guy said, okay, I'll give you 120. And the guy, Rav Safra still ignored him, and the guy kept going up in price until Rav Safra finished his lachar shasiyim kriya shema, until Rav Safra finished his kriya shema. You see, I always tell people that's the reason why you should recite kriya shema slowly, because someone may come along and offer you a lot of money, and the longer you say your kriya shema, the more money you stand to make. But in any event, so Amar lo Rav Safra tol hachefetz bedamim she'amarta barishona. So Rav Safra said, you know what? You offered me 100. That's at the first time. That's fine. That's what I'll sell it to you for. Sheba'osam damim hayadaiti litein lach ad kan devarav. He says, because that's what I had in mind to sell it to you for anyway. Now, there's different ways to interpret the story. The question is, did Rav Safra hear the guy when he came to offer the $100 initially? Probably he heard him, but when the halacha is in Shulchan Aruch, when you're reciting Kriya Shema, you're not even permitted to gesture with your face or your hands or your head. You can't make any gestures. You have to be solely focused on the Kriya Shema. So Rav Safra probably heard him, and he said, when I finish Kriya Shema, I'll engage with the guy and I'll give it to him for what he wants. Now I got to focus on my Kriya Shema. So that's really the simplest understanding of how you understand the story. So that's the end of the story. So now that's the basis for this whole idea that if you've already committed something mentally to somebody when it comes to financial issues, then you should follow through on that commitment. V'nira l'aniyas daiti d'masha matzui b'mischar shehamoicher mevakash sikum mesuyam avor hachefetz uvelibo choshev she'im hakona yiten lo pachos mizeh gam ken yaskim b'diavad. He says, but let's think about a real life scenario. Real life scenario is a guy is offering a piece of merchandise for sale, and he says, I'll give it to you for 100, but he's also thinking in his mind that if the guy enters into negotiation, he's prepared to go down to 80. Okay? So now you would say to yourself, if you're prepared to go down to 80, don't you have an obligation to sell it to him for 80? Right? So where do you draw the line here? Mentally, he's already thinking, if he offers me 80, I'll give it to him. He says, Dezelo nichlal be'inyan hanal. He says, that's not included in what we're talking about over here. He says, you're allowed to do that. He says, in the story of Rav Safra wasn't interested in negotiation. In other words, that was not his initial intent. But he thought, he says, this is what I would take for this object. If the guy's offering me 100, I would take 100. אבל בנידון זה שהוא דרך המסחר, שמעיקר המחשבה היא לדרוש יותר, ורק בדיעבד להסכים על פחות. He says, but in the normal course of sales, it's quite reasonable for negotiation to be a part of the process of selling merchandise, especially, in the Middle East, and when you're in the shuk, or whatever scenario you find yourself, haggling over a price is the normal part of the process of selling. He says, in that situation, the seller being willing to take 80 was not his starting position. He said, listen, I'd much rather get 100 than 80. But if the guy haggles me down to 80, that's my bottom line. I won't go past that. He says, Ach ma shematzui sha'adam mocher lechavero eza davar asalo eza avoda v'sikmu b'neim al sikum dolar. He says, but let me give you another real life situation, explains Rav Stern, which I'm not sure is so relevant anymore today in the 21st century, but let's take a look at the case. He says, two people enter into, this was something that was 30 years ago was actually quite prevalent, or 40 years ago maybe. He says, a guy hires someone or sells something to someone at a certain price, and we're talking about it's happening in Israel, and they agree between the two of them not to a shekel price, but to a dollar price. And we're talking about American dollars here, you understand. So what's happening is that they agree that it's going to be X number of US dollars instead of X number of shekels, because back in the 80s, the shekel was not a strong currency, and it could very well be that it was very subject to fluctuation. And perhaps if they said, okay, next month I'll sell you this item, the seller or the buyer didn't want to take the risk of a fluctuating shekel, and so they set the price in dollars. Okay? Now, the hamocher hapoel hitkaven belibo al dolar sha'ar yatzig. And one party had in mind that when I say I'll sell it to you for X dollars, he meant to say whatever the shekel is worth at that time, we'll do the exchange. So he says to him, I'll give it to you for $100. And his thinking was, whatever the shekel is worth, I'll take that equivalency in shekels at the time when we consummate the deal. Uvishas piraon bahanal v'nosim al dolar mamash. But then when it comes time to pay, the buyer pays him not in shekels, but pays him in actual dollars, gives him $100 actual US dollars. Shehu shaveh yoter ma'at, which is actually worth more than the shekel equivalent. Okay, that's why I said I'm not sure how relevant this is today, because the shekel is such a strong currency that for some people they'd rather have shekels than dollars. But it all depends on the strength of the currency. Bazeh nira vadai sheyirei shamayim yesh lo ledakdek bazeh v'tzarich lomar lo dekavanato hayta sha'ar yatzig. He says in that situation, a God-fearing Jew is obligated to clarify and say to the buyer, said, my friend, when I set $100, 100 US, what I meant to say was that you would give me shekels based on the equivalent market rate of the day that you pay the shekels, because that was really what I intended. The fact that you're willing to give me $100 cash is actually more than what I had intended. And so he feels that it's important to disclose that. Dehol ve'etzlo haya kavanas libal shar yatzig im kain eino lokachat yoter. He says it's therefore not proper, since your intent was to take the shekels instead of the dollars, and the dollars are actually more valuable in a sense in the market where the shekel is so fluctuating and is a weaker currency. Then you shouldn't take anything more than just the shekel equivalent. Below od ela efshar delo rak yirei shamayim tzarich ledakdek bazeh ela yitachen dehu mitzad hadin. He says, and I'll go even further. It could be that even halachically, not only is this an act of piety to disclose this, but you have to actually halachically do this. The Ayin Shulchan Aruch Siman Yud Beis Sif Ches, the Yesh Omrim, the Mechila Belev Havi Mechila. Al Kain Bevadai Deroy Lizar Bazema Od. He says there are some poskim who say that once you've forgiven something in your heart, you're not allowed to take it. Once you've basically said to a person that he doesn't, in your mind, mentally, you've committed that he doesn't have to pay you, then according to some poskim, you're not allowed to take it once he comes forward to pay you. For example, a guy borrowed some money from you, and you said after a long time, you had Rahmanis on him, and you said, you know what, I'm moichel the loan in my own mind. I'm mentally moichel the loan, and he doesn't have to pay me. if at that point the guy says, I know it's been a long time and I haven't been able to pay you, but now I'm going to be getting some money in and I'm going to be able to pay you. According to some poskim, you're actually obligated to tell the person, my friend, I was already moichel. I don't want it anymore. Then at that point, if he says, well, I still feel from my own standpoint, I feel a moral responsibility to give you the money, you can say to him, if you want to give it to me as a gift, that's fine. But I just want you to know you have no obligation to give it to me. And basically what he's saying is that this would be also perhaps within that same realm. He says, because since you've already mentally forgiven something and you had told the guy $100 thinking that it was only going to be 100 shekels, not 100 US dollars, or the equivalent of $100 in shekels, so you've already forgiven the US cash. And therefore it could be that you're not even permitted to take it unless you reveal it to the guy and he wants to give it to you nonetheless.
Can I follow up on that?
Sure.
It kind of touches on what we talked about last week about if circumstances change. So if instead of saying, I forgive the guy because he's poor and I don't think he's going to have the wherewithal to pay back, and instead you have in your mind, I forgive him because he's poor, but if he has the money, then I'll take it. If you have that in your mind, then if he does say, I now have money, I can pay you, then could you take it?
Yeah, because that's a conditional mechila. It's a conditional for forgiveness of the debt, and then I think it would be fine. It's only.
Are we still?
Go ahead.
Sorry, are we still in the realm of midas chasidus when we're talking about this case? When you say they're forbidden to, I thought we were in midas chasidus.
Right. So he says that he's equivocating a bit, and he says it's possible that when it comes to something that you've mentally forgiven already, even beyond chassidus, but even halacha requires you to disclose that you've already forgiven it, and the person does not have to give it to you.
So at the beginning, when you were asking for an example, another example, it's not quite this case, but you go into Sobeys, you want to buy, I don't know, whatever it is, it's $8. You go in, she punches it in, it's $12. By mistake, she punched it in, instead of potatoes, she made pineapples. And you tell her, look, I think, because you were prepared to pay $8, and she punched in, or $12, she punched in as $8, you tell her you made a mistake. This would be another example, not quite this level, but where you're prepared to pay one price, she punches in at a cheaper price, you tell her, look, I think you made a mistake.
You have to realize, Izzy, that she's not the merchant. She's an employee of the merchant, and the merchant wants to charge you $12. The merchant really does charge $12 for that item, and she mistakenly punched in $8. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, so that's what I'm saying.
Situation, you're halachically obligated to point out the mistake to her, because she's an employee. She made an error for her boss, and therefore might even be a problem of geneva if you're aware of the fact that she made an error. Now, I know that in supermarkets, generally speaking, when employees make an error, up to a certain amount, they will tell the customer that you're allowed to go with the lower price. But I still think that there may be at least a moral imperative to disclose the error to the employee, because it's, again, they're not the merchant. They're just working for the merchant. Okay.
Rabbi Kropkin.
Yeah.
With regards to the forgiving of the loan, if you said if he wants to give it to you as a gift, he can. If the person gives it to you a gift, do you have to take meiser from it?
That's a great question. I don't know the answer to that question offhand. I guess I would guess that probably you are, because you've put it into the realm of a gift. Again, that goes into Hilchos Meiser, which is a different realm of halacha right now, and it's So it would seem that way. It would seem that it's something that was just not. It would seem that way. It's a valid point. Okay. Lasos ezatova lechaver. We had also learned that if you had mentally committed to do a favor for your friend, even something non-monetary, then a pious person always follows through. So here now he gives a real interesting real life scenario, and he says as follows: Im haya bedaito lihishtatef besimchas chavero. A guy plans to go to his friend's making a wedding for his child, and he gets an invitation to the wedding, and he says, okay, I'm going to go. He sends a respond card, and he says, I'm coming to the wedding, and he's preparing a check also, and he's going to bring a check when he comes to the wedding, and he'll leave it with the gifts. The heichin v'kasav avaro check l'daron. So he prepares a check. V'shuv nivtzar mimenu lihishtatef b'simchato. And then at the last minute, he's unable to come to the wedding. But he's got this check that he already made out, and I'd love to hear some of your thoughts about this. Is there a moral imperative, like from a piety standpoint? Halachically, he doesn't have to deliver the check until he delivers the check. There's no obligation halachically for him to mail the check because he didn't send it yet. But his whole intent was, I'm going to the wedding. I'm going to be part of the simcha. They're going to spend money on me. I at least should give a check for the simcha so that the kids can get a good start, right? And then he decides, you know what? I can't make it to the wedding. He's not such a close friend of mine. Do I really need to send a check? And he decides that he's not going to send the check because he couldn't. He canceled. He called him up. He says, I can't make it to the wedding. And now the question is, do I have any kind of moral obligation to deliver the check that I've already made out and I just haven't mailed it yet? Before we look at the text, what do you say? What do you think?
And I think if it's before, like if it's after the time where they can't cancel the per head cost, then you're kind of obligated to give the gift. It makes no difference to from a financial standpoint, I think.
Okay, let's say he found out a week before that he can't make it to the wedding.
And you were able to reduce the numbers?
Yeah.
Cater?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So yeah, he's still obligated. He's written the check already.
I think if it's written, there's a difference.
Okay. Anyone else?
I think because he make a commitment to himself already, he's obligated to give the money.
Yeah, well, again, this would be what we would call midas chasidus, right? It would, from a piety standpoint, he should fulfill his thoughts. Right?
Well, he might have been thinking, well, if I go, then I obligate myself to this check, but on the contingency that something else comes up and I don't go, then maybe his thinking was that I wouldn't give the check.
That's kind of what I was saying about forgiving the loan earlier, that if you put conditions on your thoughts, then you may be able to back out. I think what's really problematic is if you back out when it's too late for them to adjust the costs.
Okay.
And
okay.
That's a real problem.
So let's take a look and see what Rav Stern says. He says, Nir la'anias daiti. He says, it would seem to me, in my humble opinion, de'ein chova limsor lo acher kach hasamatana, that if you didn't go to the wedding and you told them you can't make it, and you just have this check that you've already made out, it would seem to me, he says, you're not even obligated from a piety standpoint to deliver the gift. And he says, I'll give you a reason. He says, Na'ayin bekesef hakadoshim siman mem sif aleph. He says, I refer you to the Sefer Kesef HaKadoshim, Shekasav Sham al Divrei HaShulchan Aruch, the HaKosev Lechavero Bishtar Shu Chayev Lo. And he cites a case from the Shulchan Aruch, where a person writes an IOU to his friend, and he says, I owe you $100. The Afal Pi She'ein Sham Eida Mikol Makom is Chayev Biksav Yado. He says, even if witnesses are not there to witness the writing of this promissory note, once you write the promissory note, you become obligated to make good on that gift. But that's only true if you've delivered the note to your friend. If you give a friend a promissory note saying, you're such a great guy, I want to give you a gift, so you give him a promissory note for $100. Okay, that's not really a real life scenario because we don't use promissory notes. But in the times of the Shulchan Aruch, That was something. If you wanted to gift something to someone, you'd write him a note and say, I'm going to give you $100. Okay? He says that halacha only applies when you've already given him the promissory note. He says, and even if you gave the note to a third party and the third party is a Gentile, you're still not obligated to make good on that gift. He says, and even if you give it to a Jew, you're not obligated unless the Jew says, I hereby accept this note on behalf of Ploni. But if you just say, hold on to this for me, because I'm going to give it to so-and-so, then so-and-so does not become now the immediate beneficiary until it's delivered into his hands. And there's no halachic imperative to make good on that note. Now, a check, in a sense, is a promissory note. When you think about it, it's a financial instrument such that when I write a check to a person, I give him the right to take that note to the bank and authorize the bank to give this person money from my bank account. He says, and I refer you to a Gemara in Bava Metzia, which we're not going to look at right now. He says, V'hacha b'check adif misham. He says, now a check is even better than there. In other words, in what sense? The yesh omrim, the check, eno bichlal his chayvus rak hara lahabank litain. He says a check isn't even, in a sense, a promissory note, but rather just an authorization that when a guy presents this note to the bank, I'm giving my bank permission to give him my money. He says, but it's not actually the same level of obligation. I'm not obligating myself to give him $100. I'm giving him the right to go to my bank and take out $100 from my account. Begam imlonin kot kach, he says, and even if we're not going to make that differentiation between a check and a note, mikol makom kan vadai she'ein bazeh shum ischayvus kol zman shelo higia liyad hamakabel. But the bottom line is in both cases, whether it's a promissory note and a check, there's certainly no obligation for me to make good on this note until it gets into the hands of the recipient. So if the check is made out to the Choshen and Kala, and I have not delivered it to them yet, there is clearly no halachic obligation for me to make good on that gift if it hasn't yet reached their hands. So that's certainly, from the halachic standpoint, we can establish that there's no halachic obligation for me to deliver that check, even though I've already written out the check.
So if you drop it in the mailbox, is it considered delivered?
You could argue that if it gets in the mailbox of the recipient, then it's already on their property, so it's already been delivered.
No, but I go across the street, I drop it in my mailbox for delivery.
If you if you leave it in their property, if you put an envelope on someone's property, it's considered to be delivered to that person.
Okay, so no, what I'm saying is I put it in the delivery in the mailbox here. The bin that's on my.
In other words, I take
it to the post office.
So long as it hasn't been delivered to them,
I can cancel a check.
You can
put a stop payment.
I guess you could put a stop payment on the check, but that's a separate issue, because when they receive it, maybe there's already a sense of reliance that they have that they're going to have that money.
Right.
So that might be a little bit different. But let me just finish this point. He says, "Below ode, elanira lanias daiti, da afilu mishu yirei shamayim diyesh lo lakaim afilu machshavos libo." So Rav Stern wants to say, I'll go even further. Certainly, there's no halachic obligation for me to make good on that check and deliver the check, because, as we know, I only become obligated to make good on a gift once it's in the hands of the recipient. But even from this standpoint of piety, a person always wants to fulfill the intent that he had in his mind. That's what we're saying, dover emes bilvavo, speak truth in your heart. As the Rav Shulchan Aruch writes, that if you had intended to do a favor for your friend, you should follow through. He says, "Mikol makom benidon didan shekol kavanaso mikara ha'isa rakim hu yishtatif b'simcha az hu yitena samatana." But think about it over here. This fellow's intent was conditional. Even mentally, it was conditional. I'm writing this check because I hate to go to someone's wedding and come empty-handed. It's not because, like, in other words, there are a lot of people that you have like that. They're not your closest friends. You don't really know the kids at all, but you just feel a sense of obligation. If I'm going to their wedding, they're going to pay money on my meal and on the whole geschäft, and I'm you know, and I want to feel that I'm part of it. So I'm going to leave a check when I go to the wedding. But if you had you known that you were not going to go to the wedding, you wouldn't have written a check. But if you're not going to go to the wedding, you would not have felt that sense of a duty to deliver a check. And even if that was not your explicit thinking process, but it's certainly a reasonable assumption to make that that's what you were thinking originally. And therefore, if you did not end up going to the wedding for whatever reason, then you don't have an obligation to follow through, even on a moral level, on a level of piety. You have no obligation to follow through with that gift. So it could be that it depends, that a lot will depend on, there's a lot of circumstantial factors that will go into these things. In other words, there are some times when a friend is so close that even if you don't go to the wedding, you had planned to give a check. And now all of a sudden, for whatever reason, your wife is telling you, we really can't afford this, and maybe we need it for this or need it for that. But in that situation, maybe there would be a moral imperative for you to follow through on that, because regardless of whether you were going to go or not, you had intended to give the kids a gift. So, but in this scenario that the Reb Stern has described, you see that sometimes even from a moral standpoint, there's no obligation to follow through. So these are all illustrations about how we have to think things through carefully in order to feel that we're doing the right thing.
I guess, Rabbi, a nuance on that one is perhaps you could change the amount to a lower amount if you decide not to go and there's still time for them to not incur a cost for you. I'm not going, so I still want to give a gift, but it won't be as big as if had I gone.
Yes, exactly. Right. That's another good point. Have a wonderful day, everyone.
All right, Rabbi. Be well, everybody. Take care.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Enjoy the music.
And the haircut.